Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on the rock cycle. In this video, we're going to talk about the difference between metamorphic, igneous, and sedimentary rocks, as well as how each are created using the rock cycle. So to recap what we've already talked about, everything that we know about the geologic timescale is because of rocks. And there are three main types of rocks. We have our metamorphic rocks, our igneous rocks, and our sedimentary rocks. And what's on the screen right now is one of each. Let's start with our igneous rocks. So if we were to define the word igneous, igneous just means fire formed. And if we think about the process in which our igneous rocks are going to be formed, they're going to be formed from magma or lava that has cooled. So igneous rock is actually pretty prevalent. It actually makes up 95% of the Earth's crust. And so if we're thinking about the formation of an igneous rock, essentially a volcano will erupt. That magma will flow out. That magma eventually cools, and our igneous rock is formed. It's a pretty simple, pretty cool process. And some examples, and we are going to be exploring a little bit later, but some examples include things like obsidian, which is this nice purple rock, pumice, which is this nice little rock with the holes, and even granite. You know, if you have granite countertops, that's technically an example of an igneous rock. And there are lots of other examples. Alrighty, next up we have our metamorphic rocks. All right, one of the most important things that we note about our metamorphic rocks is that they're actually made over time from other rocks. And they're also made deep below the Earth's surface. The reason why that's important is because while igneous rocks can form beneath the surface, they also actually can form above the surface as well. But your metamorphic rocks are always going to be made beneath the surface of the Earth. So essentially what happens is you have a rock that's deep below the surface. Some heat and pressure is going to occur over time, which is going to change the rock. And so based on that heat and pressure, or the amount of heat and pressure that's applied, you then get a metamorphic rock that forms. And some examples of metamorphic rock are here on the left. You have what's called gneiss, the G is silent. Quartzite, which is actually pretty commonly found just out in nature. Slate, which is another one. And again, we'll be doing some exploration into learning a little bit more about these. And lastly, we have our sedimentary rocks. So our sedimentary rocks are going to be formed when sand particles or pieces of rock or even pieces of fossil are deposited somewhere by water and wind. And they're going to be deposited in layers. And so this is not an instantaneous process. It just happens overnight. You know, over time, you're going to get layers of sediment that's going to pile on top of each other. Then eventually, those particles, excuse me, will be compacted together. That's what compaction means pushed down together, and then cemented together, just like the same way cement works to make roads and things. And compaction and cementation is going to work together to basically change that sediment and those little pieces of rock and fossil into a sedimentary rock. Sedimentation happens, you know, just using water and other types of materials, things that are wet, kind of turns into like a cement that hardens over time. And so the definitions of compaction and cementation are here for you in case you want a more fully defined definition. But essentially, compaction, cementation, you get a sedimentary rock. And so because sedimentary rocks are made based on sediment, they can actually contain a lot of different pieces. They can contain shells and bones and leaves and stems and, even cockroach legs and the remains of other organisms. And again, over time, those living organisms that might be in a rock will eventually die if they end up getting stuck while they're alive. But again, lots of things can be stuck in sedimentary rocks because the only thing that really is needed to form them is some some compaction and some cementation. And so because rocks are able to change from one form to the other, we are going to call this the rock cycle. And there are 6 ways that the rock cycle can be changed. Weathering, which we've already learned about. Erosion, which we learned about. Compaction and cementation, which we just learned about. Heat, pressure, and then some melting. And we're going to talk about each part of the rock cycle and how each rock changes from one form to the next. So weathering and erosion are important because they're going to break our rocks down into sediment and then transfer it. So again, weathering is the breaking down. Erosion is the movement. We know that deposition, they will eventually deposit somewhere. Our compaction and cementation is going to create our sedimentary rocks. Movement of the Earth's crust is going to give us that heat and pressure, which we know makes metamorphic rock. Volcanic activity is going to melt rock into magma, which we know creates our igneous rock. All right, the last thing you'll do for notes is you're going to work independently or with a partner to fill out this chart. You should have most of the information that you need to be able to try to fill it out on your own first. I want you to pause the video and try to fill out as much as you can on your own, and then come back to the video to see the completed chart, as well as, just hear some explanation on how our rocks change from one form to the next. Pause right now, please. All right, so up first we have our sedimentary rock. In order to get a sedimentary rock, your igneous rock or your metamorphic rock or even another sedimentary rock is going to undergo weathering and erosion. So the arrows that are labeled as weathering and erosion, you should have labeled as such, because again, they'll break down, they'll turn into sediment. And then in order to get our sedimentary rock, it will undergo compaction and cementation, which will turn it into a sedimentary rock. All right, we then know that our igneous rock is going to form from cooled lava. So in order to get an igneous rock formed, you're going to get either an igneous rock or a metamorphic rock that is going to melt. Again, this is going to require some sort of heat, but it'll melt and turn into magma. And then that magma will eventually cool. And once it cools, it'll be an igneous rock. That's how we go from one of the other types to igneous. And then lastly, we have our metamorphic rock. We know that metamorphic rocks are formed under extreme heat and extreme pressure. So our sedimentary rock or our igneous rock is going to undergo some heat and pressure, and that'll eventually get us a metamorphic rock. And that, friends, is the rock cycle.